Turtles Tournament Fighters, what jolly good fun. When one thinks of Street Fighter 2 clones, a few usual suspects spring to mind. But Konami, they weren't content with merely cloning Capcom's cash cow. No, they had to go and make 3 entirely different fighting games all under the same name. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighter is perhaps the most confusing case of identity theft in gaming history. Released across the NES, Super Nintendo and Mega Drive, all within the same window, these were not ports. They were not enhanced editions. They were 3 wildly different beasts, each masquerading under the same box art and branding. As if nobody at Konami thought anyone would notice. The end result, a Frankensteinian trio of games that differ vastly in quality. So with all of that said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Join me today as we unpick the ludicrous, lovely mess that is Tournament Fighters, the tale of 3 Turtles tournaments, all fighting for your attention, yet failing to agree on a rule set. Yeah! Remember how incredible the classic Turtles games were back in the 8 and 16-bit days? That golden era where Turtles in Time ruled arcades and consoles alike, and every kid with a controller was yelling "Cowabunga" at the screen. Well, here's the best part. Both Turtles games and fighting games are back in style, and arguably better than ever. You can grab some of the absolute best recent releases for next to nothing right now. Use my links to pick up Shredder's Revenge for under $15, Streets of Rage 4 for less than $10, and one of my all-time favourites, Double Dragon Gaiden, for under a $5. That's not to mention up to 90% off of thousands of other games from Street Fighter 6 to Mortal Kombat 1. Happy shopping, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. By the early 90s, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video games were everywhere, and the most successful of them by far were the side-scrolling beat-em-ups. In 1992, Turtles in Time made the leap from arcade cabinets to the Super Nintendo, instantly becoming a fan favourite and cementing its legacy as one of the greatest brawlers of all time. Not to be outdone, the Sega Mega Drive got its own exclusive that same year, in the form of the Hyperstone Heist, a faster-paced, tighter remix of the arcade formula. Both games were critically acclaimed and are still considered some of the best beat-em-ups on their respective platforms. And in 1993, the Turtles had already been part of children's lives for nearly a decade. The original Mirage comic series had launched 9 years earlier, and the beloved Saturday morning cartoon had been running for 6. And while 6 years might not sound like much, in kid years, that's forever. Some fans who grew up watching the show were starting to grow out of it, or else being distracted by a new obsession, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Even so, the Turtles brand still had plenty of life left in it. Despite the franchise's slight dip in popularity, there was a loyal fan base still hungry for more, especially after the roaring success of the previous year's video games. So Konami decided to strike again, giving the Turtles yet another console outing. But this time the genre was changing. Beat-em-ups, once the perfect match for the Turtles' martial arts chaos, were slowly beginning to fade in popularity. In their place, a new champion was rising, the competitive strategic versus fighting game. Thanks to the breakthrough success of Street Fighter 2, fighting games were quickly becoming the new gold standard. And like everyone else, Konami took notice and decided to throw the Turtles into the ring. Turtles Tournament Fighters wasn't just a game, it was a project. A cross-platform experiment that tried to merge what was left of the Turtles' fading popularity with the red-hot energy of the early 90s fighting game boom. Konami clearly looked at the equation, Turtles plus Street Fighter equals guaranteed success, and thought, why wouldn't this work? 2 plus 2 equals 5, right? Well, sort of. What set Tournament Fighters apart wasn't just that it was the first Turtles game in the versus fighting genre, it was that Konami leaned into the full weight of a Turtles multiverse. By 1993, this wasn't just one franchise. You had the animated cartoon, you had the movie trilogy, you had the original Mirage comic books, and the child-friendly Archie comics adaptation, both of which were publishing simultaneously with their own characters, timelines, and tone. Each of these Turtleverses had its own lore, its own visual identity, and even unique characters that had never crossed into the others. And Tournament Fighters took full advantage of this. Instead of drawing from just one source, Konami created a mixed universe roster, mashing together fighters from across the various Turtles canons. So whether you were only familiar with the cartoon, or exclusively read the comics, or were just in it for the pizza, there was always someone new to discover. In fact, it may have even nudged curious players to explore the corners of the franchise they hadn't yet touched, turning comic readers into gamers and gamers into comic readers. Clever cross-promotion that. But here's the crazy part. Despite sharing the same name and launching around the same time, the Super Nintendo and Mega Drive versions of Tournament Fighters are entirely different games. They've got different rosters, different mechanics, different design philosophies. It's like Konami split into parallel dimensions to develop them, and today we're crossing over to compare them. Let's begin with the Super Nintendo version. Like most fighting games of the era, the story is wafer thin. There's a tournament, there are fighters, and someone's getting kicked in the shell. But hey, it's right there in the name, Tournament Fighters. You knew what you were signing up for. When you power on the Super Nintendo version of Tournament Fighters, you're greeted with a surprisingly cinematic intro. The Turtles are sat around watching TV coverage of an upcoming fighting tournament, and shockingly, their arch-nemesis Shredder has just been announced he's entering. Naturally, the boys in green decide they can't let that stand, but rather than team up as usual, they agree to enter individually, each determined to win the tournament in their own right. And here's the neat twist, they all agree that if they end up fighting each other, it's nothing personal, it's just business, or in this case, just tournament rules. It's a small touch but a smart one. Once you jump into the action, players can choose from a roster of 10 unique fighters, which we'll break down in more detail shortly. Before your first match begins, you're treated to another brief cutscene featuring April O'Neil as the tournament's host, announcing that the winner will walk away with more money than they could possibly imagine. Apparently, being a ninja mutant just doesn't pay the bills. Story and character breakdowns are coming up, but first, let's talk about how this game actually plays. Like Street Fighter 2 before it, Tournament Fighters on the Super Nintendo uses the familiar 2 out of 3 rounds format. The controls take full advantage of the Super Nintendo's button layout, offering a 4-button setup: weak punch, weak kick, strong kick. It's a simple, satisfying control scheme that fans of the genre will feel instantly at home with, but there's more to it than just mashing buttons. One of the game's standout mechanics is the mutagen meter, a green bar that fills as you land hits on your opponent. Once it's full, you can unleash a devastating super special move. No fiddly combos required, just press both strong attack buttons at the same time and let the fireworks fly. This system strikes a great balance between accessibility and depth. It gives new players an easy way to pull off powerful moves while still rewarding aggressive, well-timed play. It's intuitive, it's satisfying, and it makes for some brilliant comeback moments. Exactly what you want in a classic 16-bit fighter. One thing that not every fighting game manages to get right is player control over experience. Yes, I'm looking squarely at you, Street Fighter 3, a brilliant game mechanically, but one that left many newcomers in the dust. In contrast, Tournament Fighters offers a rather thoughtful option, the ability to adjust the game speed. This gives players the freedom to tailor the pace to their liking. Whether you're a button-mashing beginner or a seasoned fighting game veteran, there's a setting that suits your style. Each fighter comes equipped with a unique moveset, adding flavour and variety to the experience. While the basic attack range and general feel are fairly consistent across the board, meaning no character feels wildly out of step, the special moves are where the diversity shines. Each fighter has at least 1 or 2 tricks that make them stand out, giving the game just enough tactical variety to keep things interesting. And let's not forget the stages. Each arena features its own distinct backdrop, packed with detail and personality, helping to establish a strong sense of atmosphere. Whether it's a rooftop, a lab, or a techno wasteland, every fight feels like it's happening somewhere, just not in a blank void like some lesser fighters of the time. All in all, the Super Nintendo version of Tournament Fighters is a solid little fighting game. So with that groundwork covered, let's take a look at the lineup of playable characters. Of the 10 available fighters, 4 are of course the Turtles themselves: Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael and Michelangelo, and chances are you already know more about them than you'd care to admit. So instead, let's shift our focus to the other 6 fighters who round out the roster. Wingnut is up first, a bat-like humanoid alien who originally appeared in the Archie comic series and even made a one-off appearance in the 1987 cartoon. He's a deep-cut pick, but fans of the expanded Turtles universe will appreciate the nod. Next is Cyber Shredder, who marks the first time Shredder was playable in a Turtles game. Interestingly, his design here is based more on his Mirage Comics appearance than the cartoon version most will be familiar with. The name Cyber Shredder was actually first used in the Game Boy title Radical Rescue, where Shredder became a fully cybernetic menace, though in Tournament Fighters there is no in-game explanation suggesting this is the same version. He's just shiny and menacing. Then we've got Chrome Dome, a towering android who was originally created for the animated TV series. His cold, robotic demeanour contrasts nicely with the more expressive fighters in the roster, and his design fits right in with the futuristic tone of many of the game's stages. Next up is Armagon, a mutant shark from the future who appears front and centre on the game's box art. Like Wingnut, Armagon hails from the Archie Comics continuity. With his razor-sharp teeth, cybernetic armour and teleporting shark powers, yes really, he's easily one of the most memorable original fighters in the game. Then there's War, a hulking purple brute with claws like meat cleavers. He's another deep cut from the Archie universe, known as one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In other words, this isn't just some big lad for the sake of it. He's lore-rich, terrifying, and a proper tank to players. And finally, we get to perhaps the most mysterious fighter of the entire roster, Asuka. While every other fighter in the game was lifted from existing Turtles media, Asuka made her debut in this game. She didn't come from the comics, the cartoon, or the films. She was a brand new addition. This naturally led to plenty of speculation over the years. Some believe she was included to appeal more to Japanese players, especially since her sprite in the Japanese version shows off significantly more cheek than the Western release. But in 2010, things got more interesting. A beta version of the game surfaced online, and in it, Asuka didn't exist. Instead, a different version of a character was buried in the game's code, under the name Mitsu. And that name should sound familiar, because Mitsu was a major character in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, the third live-action film. The theory goes that Konami originally intended to include Mitsu in the game, but quietly renamed and redesigned her as Asuka to distance themselves from the critically panned film. Now, outside of the 10 base characters on the select screen, there are a few more worth mentioning. One is Fake Brother, a shadowy clone of whichever turtle you've chosen. He's essentially a mirror match of a purple palette swap, and while not especially deep, it's a cool touch that adds a sense of rivalry to the story mode. Then we have the 2 boss characters. The first is the Rat King, a deranged lunatic who has cast off his humanity and believes himself to be quite literally a rat. He's not mutated with this version of the character, but he's clearly unhinged, armed with range attacks and rat-based mayhem that make him a unique challenge. The Rat King is one of the few characters who managed to cross over into just about every corner of the Turtles universe. He appeared in both the original comic book series and the animated cartoon, and even made his way into multiple video games. In Tournament Fighters, he serves as one of the boss characters, and his deranged personality and rat-obsessed attacks make him a uniquely creepy adversary. But the final showdown in the Super Nintendo version, that's reserved for none other than Karai. Now, Karai's portrayal has always varied, depending on which version of Turtles lore you're looking at. In some adaptations, she's presented as Shredder's adopted daughter, or even his biological granddaughter. But in her original Mirage Comics incarnation, she wasn't related to Shredder at all. In fact, she outranked him, a high-ranking Foot Clan commander with global authority. That detail adds weight to her appearance here as the game's ultimate boss. In the Super Nintendo game story mode, Karai kidnaps both Splinter and April O'Neil in a bid to avenge Shredder. Once defeated, she's treated to a character-specific ending, a tradition that's still alive and well in fighting games of this day. At launch, Tournament Fighters on the Super Nintendo received glowing reviews from the press. Critics praised its accessible mechanics, colourful visuals and deep roster. GamePro famously gave the game a perfect score, stating, "You want Street Fighter action with Street Fighter 2? Here's a serious Street Buster clone that can bring street snobs as well as fledgling fighters out of their shell." Meanwhile, Nintendo Magazine UK dismissed the idea that Turtles were yesterday's news, writing, "Who said Turtles are old hat? The half-shelled ones deserve respect for being hottest contenders for Game of the Year." And Gameplay has summed it up perfectly. For Turtles who've grown up but still want a good brawl, the Super Nintendo version gives you 10 fighters to the Genesis's 8. And the graphics are much better too. There's one clear winner, even before the fighting starts. So that's the Super Nintendo version, a solid, well-reviewed fighter that brought together characters from across the Turtles multiverse and delivered a competent alternative to Street Fighter 2. But remember, this was only 1/3 of the story, because the exact same day, Konami released another game under the Tournament Fighters name, this time for the Sega Mega Drive. And just to keep things confusing, the box art prominently featured a Triceraton, a character who wasn't even in the Super Nintendo version. When I said these were completely different games, I wasn't being dramatic. I was being literal. And the Mega Drive version of Tournament Fighters wasted no time proving that. Right from the intro, you're met with a totally different storyline. This time we open on a group of mysterious full purple turtle doppelgangers, very much like the Fake Brother from the Super Nintendo game, who have kidnapped Splinter on behalf of none other than Krang. In this version of a story, the 4 turtles team up with a new cast of allies and travel across the galaxy in search of their missing master. As in the Super Nintendo release, Karai still serves as the final boss, but here the plot twist reveals she was secretly the mastermind behind Splinter's abduction all along. But the differences don't stop at the story. the gameplay has been completely reworked to suit the Mega Drive's 3-button controller. 1 button for punch, 1 for kick, and 1 for taunt. Yes, taunt. But it's not just for show. When combined with specific directional inputs, the taunt button lets players execute desperation attacks when their health is low, a mechanic clearly inspired by SNK's recent fighting games of the time. Stronger punches and kicks can also be triggered by holding the D-pad towards your opponent during attacks, adding a layer of nuance to each exchange. Notably, the special move meter from the Super Nintendo version is completely gone, changing the flow and strategy of battles. Instead of waiting to fill a bar, your best attacks now hinge on risk and how close to death you're willing to get. As for the roster, aside from the purple doppelgangers, this version also features 10 fighters in total. That includes the 4 Turtles and Karai again, but everyone else is exclusive to this version. So let's go through a few of them. First up is Casey Jones, the hockey-masked, sports-obsessed vigilante known for being both Raphael's chaotic best friend and April O'Neil's occasional love interest. He's a fan favourite, and it's great to finally see him playable in a proper fighting game. Then there's Triceraton, a member of the alien Triceraton Empire, resembling a bipedal Triceratops and frequently depicted as a recurring villain across multiple Turtles timelines. He was even on the Mega Drive box art, which is especially funny given he doesn't appear at all in the Super Nintendo version. And last but definitely not least, Krang himself, the disembodied brain with a grudge and a battle mech to match. He's a household name for Turtles fans and makes a welcome appearance here as a playable fighter, finally stepping into the spotlight rather than just barking orders from a giant robot stomach. The Mega Drive version of Tournament Fighters also introduces 2 utterly bizarre characters that appear to be exclusive to this release, and both are framed as allies of the Turtles. First up is Ray Fillet, a humanoid manta ray who looks like he swam in straight from the Archie comics. Then there's Sisypheus, a giant mutant beetle with a name better suited to Greek mythology than a Saturday morning cartoon. Still, they're both playable and unique, giving this version of the game even more roster variety, whether it makes any sense or not. And then out of nowhere, we get April O'Neil as a playable character. But not just any April. This version of April is hilariously dressed in what is very clearly a Blaze Fielding cosplay from Streets of Rage. It's glorious, unsubtle, and honestly, a perfect nod for the Sega crowd. Beyond the roster, the Mega Drive version also features a completely bonkers tournament mode, where you're tasked with defeating multiple opponents in a row using just 1 life bar. It's absolute madness, but it adds a strange arcade-like challenge for those looking to punish themselves. So let's be clear, different story, different roster, different combat system, even different tone. The Super Nintendo and Mega Drive versions of Tournament Fighters are absolutely not the same game. In fact, they feel more like competing interpretations of the same idea made by teams that weren't allowed to share notes. Visually, the Mega Drive version doesn't quite hold up against its Nintendo counterpart. Personally, I think the Super Nintendo version is in a completely different league. But what did the critics of the time think? Well, they didn't mince their words. Meme Machines noted that while the game offered fast fighting action and a new game direction for the terrible Terrapins, it couldn't even begin to approach the greatness of Street Fighter II. They also pointed out several gameplay flaws that held it back. Power Unlimited, which sounds more like a Sith Lords magazine, bluntly claimed the Sega version was dramatically worse than the Super Nintendo release, citing grainy graphics and stiff controls as major drawbacks. Electronic Gaming Monthly joined the pylon, stating, "Oh no, what happened in this one? The Super NES version was excellent. This one isn't even close. There aren't many moves and the fighters are unappealing. The game also has a darker look and feel. In short, the Mega Drive version definitely did what Nintendo didn't, and that was serve up the weaker game. But Konami wasn't done just yet. There was one more version of Tournament Fighters, and this one might be the strangest of them all." In 1994, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters made its final appearance, this time on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Skipping Japan entirely, this 8-bit swan song was released only in the West, and holds the unique honour of being the last officially licensed NES game ever released in PAL regions. And yes, it's a completely different game again, so let's take a look. The storyline here is far more rudimentary. There's no intergalactic kidnapping, no Karai masterminding anything. It's simply Shredder issuing a challenge to the Turtles, forcing them to fight each other and their allies to determine who's worthy enough to face him. That's it, no bells, no whistles, just fists, shells and honour. Still, despite its simplicity, the game holds a unique appeal. Tournament Fighters is one of the very few fighting games ever released on the NES, which makes sense considering the genre didn't really explode until the 16-bit era. By the time that title launched in '94, the NES was practically on life support, especially in the West. This was the final licensed NES game ever released in PAL territories, as I said, making it a genuine collector's oddity. The character roster is trimmed down accordingly. There were 7 fighters, the 4 Turtles, Shredder, Casey Jones, and one exclusive edition, Hothead. Hothead comes from the comics, and his backstory is wild. He's the result of a former firefighter accidentally unleashing the spirit of an ancient samurai dragon, who then possesses him. Yes, that's how you spice up your roster when the NES can't handle Krang's bouncy brain mech. Visually, it's about what you'd expect from a late-era NES title. There's chunky, blocky sprites reminiscent of Konami's earlier beat-em-ups on the system. The controls are even simpler this time around, owing to the NES's 2-button layout. Punch and kick, rinse and repeat, and just to set expectations, the 4 Turtles are basically palette sorts of each other. But even with limited controls, Konami managed to sneak in a super move system. How? By getting creative. During matches, Splinter's face will sometimes appear on a floating monitor in the background and drop a glowing red ball in the centre of the stage. If either player grabs it, they'll be able to perform their super move by inputting a specific command. It's clunky, it's weird, and it kind of feels like picking up a bonus in Bomberman, but it works in a scrappy sort of way. Critics at the time had mixed feelings about the NES version. Some gave it a bit of leeway due to the limitations of the hardware, but it wasn't exactly showered in praise. GamePro sums it up nicely. Konami's last dip into the sewers of Manhattan produces a workable NES fight, but it comes up a tad murky. Yanking the Turtles' weapons definitely makes them lose some bite. Either you've got to love them Turtles, or you must really need a NES fighter to get into this cart. And that about says it all. 3 consoles, 3 different games, same title, a unified brand, held together with pizza, grease, and sheer force of will. Even an Electronic Gaming Monthly had to admit that while pulling off special moves with just 2 buttons was a clever workaround, the NES version suffered from heavy flicker and visual breakup during matches. Megaload echoed the sentiment, concluding, all in all, Konami could certainly have done the conversions better, and have done better, as they already demonstrated with the NES version of Bucky O'Hare. Still, they conceded that the game offered a bit of moody fighting fun. But with the release of these Tournament Fighters titles, we were witnessing the end of an era, the final hurrah of a classic Turtles boom. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, the Turtles have been the dominant force in children's entertainment, merchandising juggernauts, video game icons and heroes in a half shell to an entire generation. But by 1993, the landscape was shifting. The Mighty Morphin Power Rangers had arrived in a flurry of pyrotechnics, spandex and Zords, quickly dethroning the Turtles and taking over as the new global pop culture phenomenon. From TV ratings to toy aisles, the Power Rangers dominated, leaving the Turtles to retreat into cult status. I personally don't think any of the Tournament Fighters games sold as well as Konami had hoped. Not only was the Turtles an aging franchise by that point, but the fighting game genre itself was becoming oversaturated. Had these games released just 2 years earlier, at the height of both Turtles Mania and the early Street Fighter II craze, they likely would have been far more successful. Even so, the Super Nintendo version in particular served as a respectable send-off for the Turtles in the 16-bit days, and it's still fondly remembered by fans now. In fact, you could argue that its simple, intuitive mechanics were a precursor to the more accessible fighting game designs we'd start seeing in the 2000s. Each of the 3 Tournament Fighters brings something different to the table. They're wildly inconsistent, yes, and not without their flaws, but they all have one thing in common: they're remembered. For many 90s kids, they weren't just fighting games. They were after-school rituals, rainy day staples, birthday presents from a clueless aunt that turned out to be amazing. So based on those reasons, they deserve respect for that, at least. Don't forget you can grab Shredder's Revenge, Streets of Rage 4, Double Dragon Gaiden, all of modern fighting games' heaviest hitters and thousands of other titles for next to nothing. Let me know which bargain you managed to grab down below, and I'll see you all in the next video. Cheerio!